Welcome to the Read-Aloud Revival. This is the show that helps you make meaningful and lasting connections with your kids through books. I'm your host, Sarah Mackenzie. Today, I've invited two of my creative favorites onto the show, and we're going to talk all about our creative lives as adults and also raising creative kids, the tension between those things, how stories shape our kids to be more creative, all kinds of good stuff. We really get into it. And I even read a favorite essay of mine by Katherine Patterson during this conversation. And then Carolyn and S.D. Smith respond to it. Now, you probably know S.D. Smith. I call him Sam in this episode. He is a friend of mine, of course. He is the author of the very popular Green Ember series, which has sold over 1 million copies, I think. Wildly successful, probably Read-Aloud Revival's top most recommended book in our Let the Kids Speak series. Kids are always calling in and saying how much they love the Green Ember. Sam is here today, and he's talking about his own creative process and raising creative kids because he's a father of 4. He and his wife, Gina, homeschool their 4 kids in West Virginia. Also here today is Carolyn Leiloglou, who's also a great friend of mine. And she has a couple picture books out, but this new middle grade series I don't want you to miss called The Restorationists. And the first one is Beneath the Swirling Sky. And the second one, Between Flowers and Bones, has just come out. And she's also going to talk about her own creative life as a mother of 4, a homeschooling mother of 4, in fact, and raising creative kids. And so it's a great conversation. I hope you love it. Here we go. Let's start by telling our listeners and viewers a little bit about our creative work, since that's what we're talking about today, and a little bit about our kids, because we specifically want to talk about how our creative work impacts our kids. I'll go first. I do a wide variety of creative work here at Read-Aloud Revival, right here on the show. Also for our online program, RAR Premium. As a writer, I primarily write nonfiction for adults, usually homeschool moms. They're my favorite. And also picture books for kids, fiction and nonfiction. I have tried my hand at middle grade novels. So far, they all are remarkably terrible. So we'll see if I can achieve that at some point. It's still a pipe dream for me at the moment. About my kids, my husband and I have 6 kids ranging in age from 22, our oldest is 22, all the way down to our 11-year-old twins. And they're really creative. My oldest daughter graduated with a degree in English last year from Franciscan University, and she's off to grad school in Scotland. Just left when this airs, not too long ago. She's going to pursue a degree in a master's in theology and the arts. Our second daughter is studying at Savannah College of Art and Design. She's studying sequential arts. I always forget what it's called, and illustration. All my kids are super bookish. I always think, I know some families are really into sports. Some families are really into music. Some families are really into all different things. We do those things. We do some sports. We do some music. But like the thing I really feel like in my family is like, we are really bookish. We're just really into stories. Everybody's always into stories. So Carolyn, do you want to tell us a little bit about your creative work and your kids?
Yeah, I'm Carolyn Leiloglou. I'm from Texas, and I write books to inspire wonder in creative kids. I'm currently been working on a middle grade series about the power of art. My husband and I have 4 kids. My oldest, we literally just dropped off at college. She's pursuing a degree in screenwriting, is interested in all things film and storytelling. My second is a senior this year, and he is interested in pursuing music composition. And then I have a freshman in high school who is just amazing at all things craftsy. She crochets, she knits, she sews, all the things. And then my youngest is same as your youngest too, Sarah, 11. And she loves to draw, loves to collage, loves to write and read. So yeah, we are again not one of those sports families. We primarily books and music for us. So
Awesome. And I have to say, one of my twins was describing Beneath the Swirling Sky the other day to a friend and said, I kid you not, I was like, I cannot wait to tell this to Carolyn. He was like, I mean, yeah, we all like Harry Potter, but this is next level.
oh my goodness.
So, I mean,
I'm so honored.
I was like, I'm talking to Carolyn very soon, and I am definitely telling her that he said that.
Oh, that is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah. He's your biggest fan, I think.
Oh,
Sam, what about you?
Hi, I'm SD Smith. I wrote the Green Ember series and some other books. And my wife, Gina, and I have 4 kids as well. And they're in the same age range as yours, I think, but as sort of from 21 down to 12. So really in a similar, I've got 2 girls, 2 boys. We're also like mostly kind of a creative family. Everybody's into music. Everybody plays stuff. And actually most of the kids kind of write a lot of music too. And my oldest are writing a book series together. Jack Zulu and the Waylander's Key, and Jack Zulu and the Girl with Golden Wings. We wrote that together. He's 18 now. He's about to finish college, and he does like screenwriting and music, and he's in the film, and he's a real weird kid, in the best possible way.
Yeah, of course.
He also plays sports too, and most of my kids do both. But I have one kid who's really, really into sports. Like that's Micah, and he's my 15-year-old. He's majorly into sports, but he's also musical.
Yeah.
My youngest is into dance a lot, but she also likes to write and read and likes music as well. And my oldest, Anne, she's 21. She's wonderful. She's written some, she's a good writer, an excellent writer. She writes like musicals, that kind of thing. She writes a lot of songs.
I didn't know that about Anne.
cool.
Yeah, she actually wrote an L.M. Montgomery book, and she made it a musical. And I'm trying to think of, it's the Blue Castle. Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So she wrote a musical from it. And then I think she found out that it was not in the public domain.
Oh,
But she was like, it's not very good anyway. But I love my kids. I mean, I know that's weird. That's unusual, but I love my kid. I know it's different than most people, but I think I'm for them.
The Green Ember is, and the whole series, the whole Green Ember series is perhaps the most requested and beloved series at Read-Aloud Revival. I mean, it is the book we always hear about on Let the Kids Speak. Kids are always calling in and telling us about the Green Ember. When I go around to homeschool conferences, they're always wearing their Green Ember shirts, and big fans here, of course. Okay, actually, what I want to start with is this essay. I'm going to read aloud to both of you, which is a shock, I'm sure. This is an essay from Catherine Patterson's out-of-print collection of essays called A Sense of Wonder. It is lovely. This particular essay is called Dog Day Wonder. I'm going to look at where it first printed. First printed, I guess, in Parents' Choice magazine in 1979. But I'm just going to read it, and then we can talk about it. And for those of you who are listening and watching and are not familiar, or you think, Catherine Patterson, why do I know that name? She has written a lot of books for children. Some of her books include, Bridge to Terabithia, Jacob Have I Loved. My favorite of her writing is actually her essays on writing and reading for children. So I love her essays. This whole book is, I don't know if you can see all my book darts, but the whole thing is written in margins and underlined to heck and back. So it's just like one of my absolute favorites. I love it. Catherine Patterson has 4 children. They're all grown now. But she's asked a lot during her time as the children's literature ambassador and as she was giving speeches and things, and is continuing to give speeches and things, how having children has impacted her creative work. We're going to talk a little more about that later. But she starts this essay by talking about those very beloved children. Here we go. Dog Day Wonder. It was the sort of hot and humid day in late August that I just hoped to get through without snapping off the children's heads at the neckline. Not the sort, surely, upon which I expected to receive a wonderful gift from one of the very children I was threatening to decapitate. At about noon, David brought me a cicada, which he had earlier discovered coming out of the ground. I think it's about ready to shed its skin, he said. Watch. You would think that a dog day cicada would sense that it had a bare 2 days to live and get on with emerging, but it took its own sweet time. First, a tiny slit in the back, then, very gradually, it was as though it had pulled down a waist-length zipper. A hint of color began to show in the narrow slit. The extremities grew, born as limbs, were eased out of the old armor. The eyes dulled as the living ones were withdrawn, and then the colors. I never would have believed them. A pure Caribbean green, yellow, aqua, cream, beige, and flecks of gold like jewelry on the head. When almost out, its wings, bits of crumpled ribbon at its sides, our cicada still clung to the old brown shell, which now seemed half again too small for its splendid body. By this time, we had watched for nearly an hour, but we weren't impatient. All our life processes had slowed down, so captivated were we by its metamorphosis. At long last, the wings stretched out, transparent except for hairline veins of green and yellow. Suddenly, in the only swift move we saw, it swung like a circus acrobat from the dry sarcophagus to the twig from which the discarded shell still hung. We swelled with pride. Our cicada had made it. We left it then, checking from time to time. The glorious colors of the newly emergent cicada darkened in time to a rich black, though its belly remained a lighter shade, and it still wore gold upon its head. At about 4 o'clock, the twig was empty. Our cicada had flown to the oak tree to breed and die, oblivious to the wake of wonder it had left behind. As I let that wonder wash over me, I realized this was the gift I really wanted to give my children. For what good are straight teeth and trumpet lessons to a person who cannot see the grandeur that the world is charged with? In her book, The Sense of Wonder, Rachel Carson says that if she had influence over the good fairy who gives gifts to children at their christening, she would ask the fairy to give each child a sense of wonder so indestructible that it would last throughout life, as an unfailing antidote against the boredom and disenchantment of later years, the sterile occupation with things that are artificial, the alienation from the sources of our strength. Pity we can't tap that fairy resource. Or is it? Isn't wonder a truly human characteristic? In fact, I don't even subscribe to that well-worn platitude that children are born with a sense of wonder that becomes dulled in the pursuit of living. Children are born with a wholesome sense of curiosity. I won't argue that, but wonder is more than curiosity. It demands an element of awe, a marveling that takes time and wisdom to supply. Both Rachel Carson and her nephew Roger, for whom she wrote her book, had a sense of wonder, but I defy anyone to prove that his sense, simply because he was a child, was of a higher quality than hers. As the book shows, Roger caught his sense of wonder from his aunt, who never tried to teach him natural history. She simply shared with him something that had filled her with wonder, saying, "Watch," or "Listen," or "Smell." Thus, to follow Miss Carson's lead, if I want my children to develop an indestructible sense of wonder, then I must first develop my own. There have been times, that twilight when we saw the double rainbow spanning Lake George and snatched all the children out of bed to run to the lakeside and watch until it faded into dusk. Or when the riot of summer stars drove us right out of our car into an open field to bend our necks back and gape and gaze. But as I joyfully recall these rare moments, I am sobered to realize how often I must be missing other chances for wonder, which, like Dog Day Cicada, are all about me, humming in the trees. 'Tis ye, 'tis your estranged faces that miss the many splendored thing. What I desire then for myself and for my children is a face not estranged but expectant, a sense of wonder on the way to becoming both indestructible and contagious. My favorite part of this whole essay is when she says, "What good are straight teeth and trumpet lessons to a person who cannot see the grandeur that the world is charged with?" And since we're talking today about how our own creative lives as adults impact our children's and fostering that creativity, I just thought that's really what we're up against. That's really what we're doing. I think that's really our goal, is to help them, like, charge them with this wonder to see. I don't know, what stands out to you, Sam?
Wow. It's beautiful. I love it. And it reminds me of my favorite quotation from Catherine Patterson, which is, "Oh, shut up, Sam." Uh, which she said to me when we were together At the Hope Words conference a couple years ago, we sat together for a long time, and that'll only stick with me the way she said it. Oh, shut up, Sam.
I can hear her saying it, actually. I actually interviewed her for a previous episode of the podcast. I should have said that before I started reading, but I'll put that in the show notes because she is so smart. And I love the way she thinks about wonder and creativity and writing and story and childhood. Yeah.
It's beautiful. I mean, that's such a beautiful passage. I mean, that's incredible. I didn't know about that book. I have one of her books on writing, and I don't have that, and I need to get it.
Well, I'll say this for anyone who's looking. They're hard to find because they're out of print. Maybe we'll have to do something about that. But A Sense of Wonder is my favorite one on reading and writing books for children. Then there's also this one, The Invisible Child. This might be the one that it's a little, I think this one might be a little more easier to find. Also out of print. But she wrote a bazillion, that's a actual number, of essays on reading and writing for children. And they were just collected in different groups. So there's like crossover. Some of these essays are in this one. And then there's some collections on Amazon Kindle too that are different collections that have some of these and some others. So there's just so many. She has so many. Yeah.
That was powerful though. It reminded me of really special times. I mean, that is, I know we're probably going to get into it, but that is where all of my work has come from, is these connections of wonder with my own kids. So that's all of my creative work that people would know about is a product of that, a product of the shared moments of wonder. And they almost always happen, or I guess, most of them happened outside, like on walks and kind of a thing. And so it's beautiful. I really resonate with that. I resonate with her emphasis on the fact that it's more caught than taught, wonder. And also it makes me like lament a little bit, like, cause I think of it as almost, it's funny because I'm vocationally, like, this is what I do. And I still think of it as something that like was more true of my kids when they were younger, than they are now. And it's still associated with that and associated with them and with my time with them when they were little. And it's almost as something that is faded in a way. And that's not entirely true, but that is like, that feels like the friction of like life is that you're continually, and I almost feel like, I wonder if that's why spend so much time professionally playing in this sort of desire to sort of be in those moments again and just to have that sort of those same sort of feelings of wonder. Because I long for that. And I remember it being like a native tongue as a child.
Yeah.
And as an adult, it feels less native and more difficult, harder to recapture. And I almost like know the reasons why, but I feel powerless to do very much about it. But I don't want to give up, and I'm not giving up. But that was just absolutely lovely.
Well, Laura Martin, who's a middle grade author I love, she was just on the show and talking about how she thinks like kids have like hundreds of good ideas every day. They just walk around seeing ideas and what if stories and like imagine this and imagine that. And then when we're adults, we have like one good idea every week or something. And so I don't remember how she said it. Yeah. And so she was like, you just got to write them all down because they just slow down. So I do think there is that, like that sense of, it's why we all, I think, want to recapture that wonder of childhood that does feel like it fades for sure among all the other things that we do as adults. Carolyn, what stands out to you about that essay from?
A lot of things. One of the things that stood out to me is actually how, she's making this metaphor with like observing the cicada, and then suddenly she twists it where like we're the cicada, and which makes me think like, and it was really brief, but it makes me think, oh, there's so much wonder in my own life. Like I don't always have to be searching for something. Like I don't think I've ever actually seen a cicada hatch from its husk, so that's pretty cool. But
I haven't. I'm okay with that too, but
I think it'd be really cool. But yeah, like there is so much wonder in our lives that we are walking by every day, and just to have eyes to see. And you're right, Sam, having, especially when you have younger kids, it helps you to see that. I just was thinking about the fact that I actually didn't really start trying to write until after I had kids. It was something I'd always wanted to do, but like something about having kids awakened that a little bit more, and maybe gave me I don't know if it's a reason or like a confidence, or just somehow awoke that more in me, something that had been sleeping a really long time. Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, but we don't have to lose it. Like we just when we were out taking my daughter to college in California, we went tide pooling on her last free day, and I mean, just seeing the kids wondering at like all this wildlife and the ocean that, we don't have that kind of ocean. Our ocean is very, very tame here in Texas. Just like the differences and, being somewhere new and opening your eyes can really make a big difference.
Hmm. I want to go back to something you said, Sam, which is that you feel like so much of your creativity has come from your time with your children. One of the things I've heard Catherine Patterson say, actually, I know it's in this collection somewhere, but I could not find where. So I'm just going to say it in my own words, trying to remember what it was. But basically, she was saying, people would ask her all the time, how do you write with all these children around? And she was like, I couldn't write without them around, actually. They're the source and summit of sorts of her writing. So you're nodding. Tell me what's going through your head.
I totally resonate with that so much. I mean, there is a kind of a civilization-wide debate now about sort of the place and importance of children, and there's so many more than it seems like any time in history, adults opting for sort of a perpetual childhood that's divorced from like the historical sort of like, oh, we'll get married and we'll have kids and we'll, it's sort of like that's an option that's less appealing to a lot of people. The implication there is, of course, that children are obstacles, and
Yeah.
of course they are to some things. There's no question about that. They cost money, and it's if you look at it in this sort of like cold, calculating, economic, or even like by the lens of like how much pleasure can I achieve in my life, you might not, or you might not be faulted for questioning whether or not having kids will that enhance my happiness, or whatever. And I was like, of course, will in lots of ways, but I think to me, I truly believe that children are not like an obstacle into creativity. I think that my children themselves are the most potent art I'll ever be a part of creating. I think that they themselves are the product of creativity. Everything that an artist wants, and they want this like sort of connection. They want meaning. They want something to resonate. There's so many things that artists want that you actually have with your children. Like if you were intentional, it's dangerous. Like the best art, it can go badly. It will go badly. It will be, there's challenge, there's drama. I think the best art is hospitable and loving and giving, and it's about love for another person. And so it's really hard to achieve that level of love for someone else that a parent has for a child. It's just so deep, and out of that depth can come this sort of, I think it's so neat that you said, Carolyn, that you don't, that a lot of the stories didn't come until after you had children. I think that's true for me. I think there were stories before, but they were different. They had the same heart, none of the same sort of like deep desire to connect and to bless and to love that is there. And so most of the audience for the Green Ember, for instance, is not, my kids not living in my home, but they have all benefited from the love that I have for my kids, because that love is overflown to them. Overflowed. That's right. It hasn't overflown them like an airplane that flies over. I'm good at English. I write books. I'm really
Well, actually, I think, like you said, it's tempting, especially because of the culture, I think, to think of kids as obstacles. They are constraints. And I think that is one of the things we can acknowledge. But all of the best art happens through constraints. And actually, as somebody who's creative, if I don't start with a constraint, I can't start at all. Like when I think of, I'm going to write a story about Barbara Cooney, like if I'm writing a story about Barbara Cooney for adults, it's going to have a whole different form than it is if I'm writing a story about Barbara Cooney for children. Those constraints are really important for me to even get started. So I feel like it all kind of goes together with like, you need constraints. It's sort of, I don't know if I remember one summer, the twins, okay, our kids must have been something like, 14, 12, 10, 2 and 3, something like that. And I would have like a half an hour to write a day, and I would get so much done in that little half an hour. And then for a summer, one of my friends' high school kids would come over and give me like 3 or 4 hours, which was amazing. But I actually didn't get a whole lot more done than I got done in my little half an hour. I think because it was like, I didn't have the constraint of like, sister, if you're going to write, you better write now. Like this is what you got. So there's something about the constraints that are really helpful to not just get us, like help us know what to make. Because like you said, if it's an act of love, if art is an act of love for the person who's going to read it, if we're talking about written art here for a minute, then we have to start with the reader. We have to know who the reader is so we can write to them. But then also the constraint of like the amount, just getting us to actually do it and overcome the voices in our head that are saying like, you don't know what you're doing. What are you doing? Who are you to make this? Who are you to write this? Nobody wants to read what you write, unless that's just the voice in my head that neither of you have, but I have a hunch.
And I think it can look different as a woman, definitely, than, as a man. Like as a woman, you tend to have a lot more responsibility in the household. And I've also been homeschooling this whole time. And so I've got a lot of restraints on me, constraints. I will say for me, every single year has looked different. And I try to prioritize like what my kids are doing and then try to find a way that my writing can fit around that. So for several years, we did like a drop-off homeschool PE program, and I still had like a preschooler who would come with me, and we would literally, the only place nearby the PE program was McDonald's. So we would go to McDonald's and I would sit and write for 3 hours and she would play in the play place.
Amazing.
And that was, that was the time that I had, and that was the constraint. And, but it worked. It worked, especially at the time I was writing picture books. It really worked. So I feel like for me as a mom, like that has looked different every year and has definitely evolved as my kids have gotten older and maybe more independent in some ways. But then I can also share more of my work with them as they've gotten older, and they can actually be more, my kids are always like very much my cheerleaders. It's very, very sweet. That they can actually be more, give actual feedback, as they get older, which is super cool. And I definitely see that inspiring them to make their own art,
I think that's funny that all three of us have sort of commented on the fact that limitations have been, because I think of those times when my kids were young. Well, the period of time that the actual Green Ember, that book came out, for me was the most insane time of my life. We had very young kids and working very, very hard. There was really, really thin margins, and that sort of time of invested with my kids was so that produced this story in the time when I had no margin at all, and there were so many difficult things going on. That I think you're right, Carolyn, about like the unique challenges of like men and women or moms and dads. It is funny that sometimes that small margins or like you said, those constraints can produce these incredible things, particularly when it's combined with this, I don't know, like a landscape of love, like the landscape where where you care so much, like nobody can care the way that you care at that time for your kids. And there's something special, that magic that happens there, not just with literature, but I think in lots of areas of life, like a kind of self-forgetfulness, which is key to storytelling, in my opinion. Like that's one of my favorite things about being a storyteller, is those moments of deep self-forgetfulness. Stop being anxious and I stop worrying and I'm creating, and it's play. It's play. To have an escape like that. But that's what being a parent is. It's like a continual confrontation with self-forgetfulness and putting others first. It's a little bit what marriage is too, really. Then it just extends further into this sort of self-sacrifice. And it's a beautiful thing and it's a hard thing. But I'm really, really convinced that beautiful things come from labor pains, that life comes from labor pains, and that there's like a less a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies. It can't grow. There's something about that in the fallen world, that it's like there's a certain kind of pain and difficulty and constraint, and sometimes it's joyful, sometimes it's hard, whatever, but that can produce things that are really, really beautiful. And I think that's what happens in homes. That's what happens with kids.
Carolyn, your book series, well, first of all, maybe let's give the listeners, maybe if you want to give them like a premise of the story series. And so, because I want to ask you specifically because your books aren't just, there are novels that are also actually celebrations of art itself. So it feels like meta for us to dive into that. So first, tell us about the books.
Sure. So book 2 is about to come out. So if anyone's not familiar with the series, The Restorationists takes place in a world like ours, but where art is powerful, paintings are portals, and one family has been tasked with protecting them. So in a second book, Between Flowers and Bones, the story is continued from Georgia's perspective. And George is always expected to be the last restorationist. So she's thrilled when Vincent is joining the team, but pretty soon his flashier gift makes her feel like a sidekick. And when she's faced with an impossible decision that challenges everything she believes, she has to learn that every gift is important in fighting the darkness. So there's good guys, bad guys. It's a very adventure-y type of story, but all the art is actual art that you could go see at a museum, or that sometimes are privately owned or stolen, and still missing. So I list all of those in the back of the book. So
Yeah, I love that tie-in. It's like, well, so the first one, there's a lot of Van Gogh
yes,
in the first one, and the second one is
a little bit
Georgia
of Rembrandt.
O'Keeffe, right?
A lot of Georgia O'Keeffe, and she's not the only artist, but she's probably the most well-known that's in that one.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So tell me what was the impetus for you to like write an adventure novel about art?
Yeah. So when I first started thinking about this idea, it was actually in a writing webinar. They said, think about the most magical place from your childhood. And for me, it was hands down my grandparents' house. Their house was just very eclectic. They had trinkets from all around the world, like a ton of books, but on every wall, it was just filled with art. They were art collectors. And then upstairs, they had a room with all of the extra paintings they didn't have space for. And they were just kind of in stacks. And their upstairs was kind of creepy. And, like, didn't really like going up there. But, so I was started thinking about their house and this place. And there's a lot of art background in my family. My mom was an art major. So, we went to a lot of museums growing up and just had a more of a sense maybe of art than maybe a lot of other younger kids did. And so just thinking about that, thinking about what kind of character would need a story starting off in a place like that, and what would happen if they could go inside the painting. So that was kind of the spark for the idea. But the secondary spark, the emotional spark, is that when I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer. And I gave up on that in middle school. I thought I wasn't good enough. School was kind of easy for me. I was a smart kid, but then writing wasn't easy. I realized, like, maybe my idea would kind of run out of steam, or I just wasn't sure if I was good at it. I was a horrible speller. And so I thought, I just don't know if I can do this. Maybe I'm not supposed to do it. And I literally gave up on it until after I had kids of my own. So Vincent, the main character in the first book, is facing that same kind of dilemma where he has given up on his art because of peer pressure and just thinking that he wasn't good enough. So that's the emotional kind of journey of the story.
I think it pairs really well for any of our listeners who are like, okay, I'm going to get my hands on this. So Beneath the Swirling Skies, where to start? Remind me what the second one is called. I can't remember the title.
Between Flowers and Bones.
Between Flowers and Bones. I actually think they pair really well with Jennifer Trafton's Henry and the Chalk Dragon.
Oh, yeah.
Which is also an interesting adventure/fantasy novel about making art and overcoming barriers in your creativity. So now, Sam, when you wrote The Green Ember, that started with you telling stories to your kids. Is that right? Tell us about that.
It did, yeah. It started in on the porch, not too far from where I'm sitting right now, just telling stories to my oldest Anne, who was just a little toddling infant. Well, not an infant, a toddler, a toddler. She was brilliant. Even as an infant, she was toddling around. But I used to just tell her different stories. And so, yeah, there was sort of story time, and there were rabbits hopping around in the yard. So I started telling her stories about the rabbits, and it became this thing with her and her younger brother. The Green Ember is about an older sister and a younger brother. And that's kind of where it started. It was my two oldest kids when they were really little, and it was our family little story. So definitely it was completely born out of, I sort of tell this to a lot of young writers, like it had zero connection to like the market, or it had no calculation, no business savvy, nothing about like, what do people want? What's hot right now or anything like that. It was, and I think it actually was pretty contrary to what was hot or what was publishable at the time. So it was just a completely organic, natural story from a heart of love from a dad to his kids.
So we all have kids who are creative and are pursuing different kinds of creativity as they get older, especially. I'm just wondering, I know there are a lot of parents listening or watching this episode who are wondering, like, how do I nurture the creativity in my kids? If they're saying they want to be a writer, they want to be an artist, like, how do I do that? Especially if they're homeschoolers. I'm just curious about what you both think has been the most impactful thing that you've done or helped or haven't done. I don't know. Like, what's been the most impactful part of nurturing creativity in your kids?
I think one of the biggest gifts that we can give our kids is time to be bored. Time without screens that they just have to figure something out to do, right? And And that's going to naturally push them into the things that they're interested. For my son, it was, drawing and piano. And for my oldest, it was just writing and reading just scores and scores of books. You really can't have true creativity without time to be bored. And I feel like a lot of modern life doesn't lend to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that would be probably my number one tip to parents is just give them the gift of time,
I
even if
love
they
that.
don't see it as a gift right at the time.
They definitely won't. I say to my kids now when they tell me I'm bored, I'll try and say oh, I can't wait to see what you decide to do with your time. And before you think I'm a great parent, I also say, and if you can't figure out something to do with your time, there are some toilets around here that need scrubbing. So if I hear the word bored again, I will volunteer you for something to do.
I love that one. That was a good one. Boredom is a massive part of sort of my creative journey because I grew up in a holler, we say in West Virginia, a hollow between two mountains. We're in the mountain state, and it was kind of really far back in the woods. Had lots and lots of time to play out in the creek and in the woods, and that was just boredom. And honestly, being a little bit poor was just valuable because I didn't have a lot of toys, didn't have a lot of the toys that I wanted, like all the GI Joes and Star Wars figures and stuff. So we had to make a lot of stuff, and my dad would make stuff for us, and it was just that was a huge part in my capacity for world building was just born in those times. So I agree with that 100%. I also think about encouragement is so important. I just think that's massive. I think I always tell this story that we almost didn't get the Narnia stories because Lewis was such a fan of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings adventures, his Middle Earth adventures. He was just constantly reading and, oh, this is great. This is great. Keep going, keep going. And when Lewis wrote The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe and shared it with Tolkien hated it. And he was very frank about how much he didn't like it. So Lewis was extremely discouraged, and he was almost like set it aside kind of a thing. And his friend, Roger Lancelin Green, who's also a wonderful writer, he said, no, this is fantastic. This is wonderful. You have to publish it. And so he's the man who saved Narnia. And that's a massive thing. He also wrote a wonderful book called The Adventures of Robin Hood, which was massively influential on me for the Green Ember world. And it probably influenced me more than, maybe anything else for that world. But anyway, just an incredible. So I think encouragement is, you just can't live without that. You can't live without encouragement. So being a cheerleader, I think is massively important. And I think there's also discipline, like the area of discipline is really important for artists. I think we think of artists as undisciplined people. And maybe that's because that's very natural for us. But that's not good for us, that you don't accomplish very much without discipline and that's really pairs really well with habits. So I think we have this volition, we have this agency in it. And I think understanding that as a child, that how much agency you do have, even though somebody's telling you when to go to bed, that you have so much power to sort of create and foster excellent habits. And I think those go in different sort of realms for me anyway. It's real important for me with my family. I wanted to foster spiritual habits with my kids. Handel said that the right hand of the artist withers when he forgets the sovereignty of God. And I think there's such a connection, even if you think about most great art in history. You mentioned Rembrandt, and others. You think about Mozart. You think about there's just such a strong spiritual connection in so much of their work. And I think that's really powerful. It's important I think it was for our family to have these spiritual disciplines, but then also like home and economic disciplines. If they're successful at all in their art, they're going to be running a business. And I don't know about you guys, but I wasn't ready for that.
That's a whole nother ballgame. Yeah.
Even though, and it may not come naturally again, but to give them some kind of equipping in that world is such a gift and so golden. I wish that I'd been a little bit better prepared on that front. You mentioned it earlier, Sarah, but it's so much when it comes down to modeling. Like they'll do what you do.
Yeah.
They will go where you go. It is hard. The cliche is, it's hard to tell a kid, hey, go read a book while we're scrolling on our phones.
Mm-hmm.
It's hypocrisy, and more is caught than is taught. But I feel like discipline, habits, those are really, really powerful. Learning things that are a little bit uncomfortable. If you're introverted as a kid, which you might be if you're kind of more on this creative side, like setting them up to challenge that, to get their heads up and see other people. That can happen in a church setting and other places. We'll look for other people to serve. Those kinds of things that we might be weak at just because we're strong creatively and sort of like slow and steady, maybe address some of those challenges. But to me, the big one is encouragement and love and modeling. And that doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but just don't give up on it.
Yeah, a couple things came to mind as you were talking. I was thinking part of that whole caught then taught is reading aloud, actually, because we're sharing stories. And when we share stories with our kids, of course, they're catching our enthusiasm for the story, which is why it also matters not to be reading stories that we think are insanely boring. It's like, oh, maybe skip those because they can feel that, But if you're as excited or interested in what you're reading as your kids will pick up on that, and then there's that sort of shared value for stories. Another thing about encouragement for our kids, Tommy DePaula told me that when he was really young, he told his mom he wanted to be an artist, and they had a small house and a lot of people in it, and they didn't really have the room for this, but she cleared out the attic and made it into an artist studio for him. And he was little. I mean, I think it was something like 7. He was pretty young. And he remembers that as being like, oh, my mom believes I'm going to be an artist. He was taking himself seriously, but then to have grown-ups take him seriously too was a huge vote of confidence. My now 20, well, when this airs, she'll be 21-year-old Allison, who's an art student at SCAD. I'll put a picture in the show notes. She says I can share this one of this is just fun, and you would like this, Carolyn, because it's Van Gogh. But when she came home for college this last summer, one of the evenings after dinner, my husband and I went on a walk, and for 35 minutes, right before we left, she said, do we have any sidewalk chalk around here? And I was like, yeah, there's some in the garage. Poke around, see if you can find it, right? We come home and she has drawn Van Gogh on the driveway because it is oh, I didn't know you could do that with sidewalk chalk, actually. It's kind of amazing. And one of the things it reminded me of is how often when she was graduating from high school and going off to art school, several people would ask me, so what did you do? What art classes did you put her in? Because I'm not a visual artist. My husband's not a visual artist. And I would say nothing. We didn't put her in any classes. She didn't have any formal training, but we did give her a lot of time and a space where she could be really messy. So even when she was really young, we had this table down in the basement, and it had to be in the basement because it was always an abomination. It was so messy. There was always so much going on there. But it was the place where she could make things, and she would make all kinds of interesting art. She was so creative, and it was interesting to watch. But I also had to be okay with the fact that it was just always there was little bits of paper and tape and glue. One of my twins is really into hot glue. He can make anything out of hot glue. I think it's a little interesting, but there's also hot glue everywhere around my house. And whenever my oldest daughter will say oh my goodness, Mom, this room is so messy. I'm like, I know, but you all 3, your oldest 3, you all turned out so creative that it works. Letting you have free reign in a space at some time.
Well, I wonder what you guys think about this. I love the indulging a child in yes, you'll have supplies, and I always like this idea of setting creative traps for kids about reading or making a beautiful place to read, and basically being a supplier in this sort of doing psychological tricks on them to set them up to succeed in some of these ways. Instead of rewarding someone for reading, making reading the reward, that.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
But I wonder about over-specialization. I tend to think that we can over-specialize. I want to encourage oh, this kid loves drawing. My son Josiah, he was a really incredible visual artist. He was always drawing, and I thought this guy's going to be a great illustrator. And he still draws, but he fell in love with music, and he writes music all the time, and he loves film, and he's writing novels, and I don't know what he's going to be. He's teen. I don't know what he's going to be still. But I tend to think we did this creative conference called Inkwell years ago, and we were trying to debate with I was talking to Zach Franzen, who does the art for the Green Ember world. And I was saying, we're going to do these different tracks, and there's kids that really want to be illustrators. And I would really like them to spend tons of time with you. So we'll have the illustrator track, we'll have the author track, we'll have the songwriter track, and we'll have the poetry track. And you can sort of do all, you can really spend time with this songwriter. Randall Goodgame was the songwriter, and you can spend a lot of time with him. And Zach said to me, he said, actually, we were debating on whether to do that or to just send all the kids through all the different 4. And he said, I would send them through all the 4. He said, they'll be a better illustrator if they go to the poetry workshop, and if they go to the author one, and if they go to the songwriting one, they'll be a better illustrator than if they spent the whole time with me. And I kind of buy that myself. I kind of buy that as be a generalist, like let them
Mhm.
play sports. They don't all have to, or let them be interested in science and math, or like let them learn to code or learn how to run a business, or like open up the world. Like, don't be like, oh, you are creative, you will write. Okay,
Yeah.
go write and don't do
Mhm.
any. Actually, don't know much about the world if you don't understand other things. I don't know what you guys think about that, but I think there's a danger in over specialization for kids.
I totally agree with that, and I think that, part of that is, like, if they do actually decide to become a writer or a musician or whatever, and they don't have anything else, like, when that creativity becomes a job, they need a different creative outlet,
Yeah,
right? So,
that's right.
like, my son who's always, he's really leaning toward music now, but he's always drawn too, and I was like, "Okay, this is don't stop drawing, that's your outlet now," like, you're not pursuing this as a business. You may want to go into piano and write songs, and that can be a lot of pressure.
Mhm.
But use this other gift that you have for enjoyment. My husband actually, so he's a pediatrician, but he writes songs, and he's not trying to professionally like publish his songs. He sings them for our church, which is really beautiful. And I
Mhm.
mean, people ask if he has them recorded, which he doesn't. He doesn't really have time to. But, it's a beautiful gift that he gives to just our local community. I think that creativity can definitely be that. It can be used to serve locally, your family, your friends, writing poems for your friends, or and there's so many different ways that our creativity can be used to serve other people and to bring joy to those around us.
I think of it kind of like, well, two things come to mind for me. One is that if you want to become a writer, you better have a pretty full life. Or you have nothing to write about.
Mm,
So if everything that you do is about writing, you have like there you need to live so that you have life to write about. But the other
yeah.
piece I think for childhood especially is that part of what I feel like my husband and my job is to spread this feast for our kids, like just dabble in a whole bunch of things, because you don't even know what you might be interested in or what is a possibility. So if you have a kid who's drawing and they show a lot of promise really young, and you decide, okay, they're going to be like on an illustrator track or something. And like you said, like at a conference, they're just going to the illustration things. They're getting a really narrow set of skills and ideas. A lot of times I find that my most creative work, both here at the Read-Aloud Revival and my work as an author, come from when I'm reading completely outside of my genre, or something completely different. And then I'm like, oh my goodness, that is like this other thing in this other part of my world. So I feel like that's just another argument for not specializing too young, giving their kids like time and space and believing in them, encouraging them, and also being like, you've never tried this other thing before. Let's try it and see. Why don't you take this class or that class or this track at the workshop or this, watch this YouTube video on this thing. Yeah.
I totally agree. I just think and I just think about my own life and moments in which I was afraid, and mostly afraid of being bad at something or being embarrassed,
Mm-hmm.
and saying the words I'm bad at, like I'm bad at math.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it gives me this comfort. So I don't have to be uncomfortable in front of other people. I can just say I'm bad at it. So then that's an announcement. So if I not do as good in school or whatever, then, but I've just closed this door
Yeah.
on this universe of
Yeah.
understanding. It's too early on, just
Yeah.
closing those doors. I'm bad at science, or I don't care about or I don't care about art. I don't care about paint. Like that might be something a young boy would say, like, oh, that's like a girl's thing. I don't know.
Mm,
That's what I thought about books when I
Mm.
was young. I saw girls reading. I never saw a boy reading. So I was like, that boys don't read. And that's so dumb. It just cuts you off from this massive world. So yeah, the over specialization, I think, is a really, really dangerous thing. And yeah, that God made us with these various capacities. I think, that we have this intellectual capacity, and we have this imaginative capacity, and we have all these physical capacities. And so exploring those and not shutting the door on them too early. Like even our
Mm.
word, I think we can like, that's my creative kid.
Mhm.
Like, well,
Yes.
mm,
Oh,
he's not very,
yes.
or like, that's the one that's good. He likes to draw. He's kind of weird that way. Like might even mean it as encouragement, but we could be helping them to close doors that actually would hurt them creatively.
Hurt them creatively or impact the other siblings who hear you say, oh, this is the
mhm.
artist in the family,
Yeah.
thereby meaning that the other ones are not. Okay, so what you were just saying, Sam, about I'm bad at fill in the blank, reminds me that John Acuff, and I just had him on the show for episode 249. We were talking about a specific exercise in his book, All It Takes Is a Goal, that I think is super helpful for homeschool moms. But I was re-listening to that audiobook, which I highly recommend, by the way. All It Takes Is a Goal by John Acuff. In there, he talks about shifting that language whenever you want to say I'm bad at to I'm new at, because then it makes it like, oh, well, of course you're not good at writing yet. You're new at it. Nobody's good. Of course you're not good at the piano yet. But it's because you're new. It's not because you're just bad at it. So I love that, because I thought saying I'm new at can be something that our kids could get really used to as well. I'm new at basketball.
That's beautiful. And honestly, just for writers, that's sort of the heart of my green writer thing, is that exact idea, because green, I've
Yes.
been trying to encourage young writers to be a green writer. And that has green in two ways. Like green as in you have a green light, you can go. You don't have to wait. You don't have to wait till you're perfect. You don't have to wait for permission. You don't have to wait till you're not scared. You can go right now. Go. But then it's also, I'm green. I'm like a living thing. I'm someone who's growing. I'm not yet what I'm going to be. So it's the exact same kind of thing. I'm new, young, I'm growing. So I'm a green growing thing. I don't look exactly how I'm going to look as a writer, but I'll never get there if I don't start and if I don't be brave. And I think that's why it's connected with the go. Like you got to go, go before that is the act of brave while you're scared. And I love that. I'm new at this. That's a wonderful agreement.
I tell my kids something very similar. So if they say, oh, I'm bad at drawing people. And I was like, well, you're not good at drawing people yet, but you get good at what you do. So if you want to get good at drawing people, you can just do it, you know, keep doing it. And then you get good at it. Yeah.
I can't remember if it was her sophomore, junior, senior year in high school, something like that. Allison, the one who's in art school now, she wanted to get better at drawing hands because she loves drawing people, but she found that hands were just so hard. So she gave herself a challenge for every day for a year. She drew a hand. She's excellent at drawing hands by the end of that year. And then she was like, nah, I got to work on feet because my feet are so bad, you know. It's just so funny though. But like, whenever she gets a college assignment that has, you know, hands involved, everybody else in class is like, oh, hands are the hardest. She's like, I got this. And that goes back to that discipline thing. That's like, you do get better at something. You do have to have some kind of discipline to be a better writer, a better artist. So there's both of those things.
So inspiring because that takes so much bravery. It takes bravery to be bad at something like publicly or whatever, to do something imperfectly, but like no one ever gets good at anything. No one ever starts off being good at anything. So you have to give yourself a chance to be bad. And that's another one of the tenets of sort of my writing class is like, get good at being bad. That's so powerful. I love that story. I'm taking that story now. That's mine now.
Take it. Briefly, you mentioned your Green Writer writing course online for kids, and we always recommend that at Read-Aloud Revival if you've got a kid who is interested in writing, especially if they're Green Ember fans, because learning writing from the writers you love takes on. It's just different. It hits differently than it does just taking a writing class for homeschool or whatever. So I highly recommend it. We'll put a link to it in the show notes for anybody who's listening who thinks their kids might dig it, because it's pretty great. I feel like we're all kind of talking about, we're learning how to raise creative kids. We're doing it, but that's how you learn anything, is you're like doing it. So we're raising creative kids. We're working on our own creative projects. What's the hardest part of that tension? Either on the raising creative kids or the working on your own creativity, or maybe it's both. What comes to mind for you as being like something that's particularly challenging?
I think it's hard, period. Right. I mean, it's like, it's hard to say, like a lot of people want to connect. Like if you think about an art class somewhere, often sort of the reputation is that is a time when nothing is happening except just craziness, and people have supplies and kind of what you were describing, a scene where like it's open. And I think people think of like, that's what art is. It's just like nothing. There's no, and apart from discipline, it's just like a time where kids have fun. And so I think that one of the hard things is being a positive person about your kids' art and being sort of like, oh, that's really good. Like you made this drawing that looks, oh, what is it? Oh, because I have no idea, because it looks so crazy. I have no idea what it actually is.
Yeah.
Like encouraging them and saying, oh, that's really beautiful. Oh yeah, of course I could tell that was a lion, and put it up on the fridge, like being that encourager. And then also sort of like someone who knows what it's like and what it demands to sort of do that in a more serious manner. And like sort of the challenge between those two, it's a really careful dance of like discipleship, of mentoring, of friendship, of love, of authority. And like, as you get into these adult kids, which we're all having now, it's like the dynamic changes some. And so at what point do you hold them accountable and say, no, what you're doing, that's laziness, and that will lead to this. That's a really, and when do you just say, like, I love you just how you are. You're awesome. You're wonderful. To me, that's the challenge, is like knowing how to navigate that well as they get older, with the particular information that I have that's very directly related to like the business of being like a writer, that's my job. And not everybody has that, but it's like that particular information is hard to sort of pass on generously. So rooting all of that in love, like, and that to me, that's why that love is this sort of supreme virtue, because it's got to master all the other ones, like how to fall back, into a heart of love and acceptance for my kids that invites them into high standards, that invites them into challenging things, that doesn't say take the shortcut, that doesn't say mediocre or unkind or selfishness is okay. So I think that might be the biggest challenge for me, is just knowing how to navigate those like different callings.
That was a great answer. So I'm going to take the question a totally different direction and not just repeat what Sam said. So the other half of what you're asking is how do we balance that between our creative lives and our kids' creative lives?
Mm-hmm.
Because I would say anyone raising kids is raising creative kids. Like, all kids are creative, right? And so as a parent who's also trying to be creative and pursue a creative career, one big thing is, like, I have to make sure my kids understand that they really are my priority, that I don't care more about these book babies than I care about them. And obviously, like, there's going to be seasons where it's more busy with a book launch, but I really have been trying to make an effort to show them that, like, no, I really care about what you have going on. Like, obviously, no, we can't do like every single thing you want to do. That's just part of being in a family. Like, we have family commitments and stuff.
Yeah.
But you are more important to me than this book. It'd be like really silly for me to just be writing books and not be caring about you guys. So I, number one, try to make that really clear and obvious to them, and talk about it. So yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
the other direction of that answer is,
Mm-hmm.
like, as an adult, like, pursuing creativity. How do I approach that with kids?
Well, what about you, Sarah? I really do. I'm curious about you. How do you do that? How do you balance that with your own children? Like, tell us the answers to all of life.
What should we be doing, Sarah?
I was just going to actually say, I think that same tension of like wanting to support your kids and help them feel seen and valued and loved by you, and also pursuing your own dreams. It's hard. It's like that tension is tricky. It's so interesting. Just this last weekend, my oldest daughter is still home before she leaves for Scotland. I came home at the end of the day, and there was a pot of Mums on my dresser in my room with a letter where she was like, just, "Mums for my mom. I just wanted to let you know that, thank you for being Christ's love to me." But she said a line in there that I was just like, ugh. And she said, "Thank you for modeling for me what it looks like to chase your dreams." It is interesting because when she was younger, I think I worried so much about whether or not she did feel like, you get so excited about your projects when there's something big and exciting happening with them. And not that your kids don't feel loved by that, but there were definitely times when I know there were remarks from all the kids or from me or from my husband that were like, hello, we're over here too, all valid, because when you get really into something, like, I will sort of like forget the rest of the world exists while I'm working on a creative project. So I feel like one of the things that is hard for me is remembering that it never feels in balance. Like, over time, like, if we zoom out, we can say, well, goodness, we spent so much time reading together and talking together and praying together and playing together. There was a lot of those. But in the moment, on a normal like day, I never feel like it's in balance. I never feel like I feel like one is almost always eating the other. Like, either like my parenting life is taking over everything, or my creative and work life is consuming more than it should of my time and attention. But like, if I back up, I can get a little more perspective. It was helpful to hear that from my oldest daughter. Like, thanks for modeling that, because sometimes it feels just super selfish, like when we have our own creative dreams that we're pursuing. And we forget that then by doing the discipline, like being disciplined and writing most days or doing our art most days, whatever that craft is, we're actually modeling for them something that they may be able to take with them. Not just the fact that like mom spends all of her time and attention pouring into their creative passions, which is also something, or interests, which is something that I also want to do. But yeah, that tension is hard. It's tricky. Mm-hmm. Someone's listening right now who has a kid who wants to be a writer when they grow up. There's probably a lot of people listening or watching who have a kid who says they want to be a writer when they grow up. So what would you say to that mom or dad?
So this actually kind of reflects what you guys were just saying. Is one thing I would say to parents whose kids want to be a writer: let them see you being creative. I just know, like, when I first started really pursuing writing, and then I was sharing those little stories with my kids, like instantly they were writing their own stories, like making their own little picture books. And what I've seen is, when I have taken time to be creative and show that to my kids, they see that happening, that they value their own creativity. And it's not just me. Obviously, I said my husband, he writes songs, he shares them with our church, and that just validates, like, hey, God made us creative. Like, this is something that's vital and important in your life, and it's worth giving time to, even if it's not your profession. That, I think, is what one thing that makes the biggest difference. And then I would just say, like, don't be in a rush to publish them. Like, let them have this time to experience and create and develop their skills. Take Sam's writing class, because once you do publish, your relationship to your work changes, and that's something I feel like most teens are not ready for. Certainly not most, like, younger kids are ready for, because then you have Amazon reviews and they might be negative, and then you're having to think about book sales and numbers and all of those things. So, like, give them the gift of time, waiting a little bit for that, and because they'll just be all the more prepared if and when they decide to publish later on.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful advice. And I would go back to a little bit to the habits thing, and I would just say go, don't wait. If you wait for permission, and I think Carolyn's advice about waiting on publication is probably, I think that's great advice.
It's great advice.
But as far as writing goes, go. You'll never get to the place where you're ready for publication, where you're ready to share really good, excellent work with other people, unless you go, unless you're bad at it for a while. And I will just say that habits beat talent. If you started writing 100 words a day right now, and you did like the Allison's hand thing, if you just did that, and it was yours was 100 words or 50 words, if you did that, you would be unstoppable. I mean, at the end of that, it's just the habit is so powerful. So do it, and take the long cut, and draw hands every day, write every day, and you will be a rare creature, because it's not always just about what you are doing, but it's about what you're becoming and who you're becoming. And that's why I think it's really important to think about not just the craft, but about your identity and who you are. I always like to say that love and service is better than fame and self-expression. That if you root yourself in a better identity, for me, that's, I want to be identified with my Lord, Jesus Christ. And I think his way of love is this self-sacrificial, hospitable, loving way. And that's what I want to be. I want to be that kind of man, and I want to be that kind of a writer. I want to be a generous person, a person who gives good gifts. If you think about your identity, like, work on that, know who you are and what you're operating out of. And I think that will also help a lot when the bad Amazon review comes, and when the rejection, and when this happens and that happens. I've been given a whole lot of grace. I've been given a lot of gifts, and I want to use my gifts that I've been given to serve and love others. And storytelling is an amazing, wonderful way to love others. On the craft side, habits, and on the identity side, like, lean into that sort of generous, hospitable disposition. And I think that will set you up for all of the challenges that you'll face better. It'll equip you in a way that I think just going headlong won't or couldn't.
Sam, what's coming out next? What should people know about? What books have either come out recently or coming out next? What do you want people to know about?
My newest book that just came out September 10th is called The Found Boys, and I'm really excited about this. It's my first traditionally published book. And it's a great story. It's about friendship and forgiveness, and I'm very excited about it. And you can find out more about that at sdsmith.com/foundboys. And honestly, it's an optimistic book. It's funny. I think if people read it, they'll come away feeling like, I don't know, feeling good, feeling warm, and feeling hopeful about what they can do and be in our culture, and just and through the eyes of a child. So much is possible. There's so much hope and so much possibility, and I think this book explores that in a really like an adventurous, sort of funny way.
Excellent. Carolyn, what about you?
So we talked about this a little bit before, Between Flowers and Bones. So if people have read my first book, I always say that the theme of that one is you were made to create. And the theme of Between Flowers and Bones is more about every gift matters. Yeah, people can go check that out. And I've got some free resources having to do with art, like a picture study guide and a guide to taking your kids to an art museum on my website at carolynleiloglou.com.
Excellent. And I'll put that link in the show notes because nobody knows how to spell that.
You know what? Can I tell you a secret? It's actually super easy to spell.
Yes.
It's 3 English words smushed together. So lei, like a Hawaiian lei, Lei, log, like you're chopping wood, and Lou, like the name. And that's Leiloglou.
That's amazing. Thank you both so much for coming. This has been a delight. I'll be back here in 2 weeks with another brand new episode. In the meantime, you know what to do. Go make meaningful and lasting connections with your kids through books.